Hi guys, Tom here from Getting Into TV podcast. This week I'm chatting to Hannah Pollock, who is an assistant producer that works in the Natural History Unit. It's a jam-packed episode. She has so many great stories to share, as well as a load of tips if you want to work in natural history, what it's like working out in the middle of nowhere. But also, as we're both on the assistant producer accelerator program, it seemed only right to talk about what it's like to step up to an assistant producer and what responsibilities you take on. Before we start though, I just want to say, please head on over to Getting Into TV podcast over on Twitter and Instagram and on Facebook, just so you don't miss out on any of future episodes or anything that I share. I share a lot of jobs out there as well. So if you're wanting to make your first break into TV, please head on over there and you'll find a load of resources. But without further ado, here's my chat with Hannah. Thank you, Hannah, for joining the podcast today. For anyone that doesn't know, Hannah is an assistant producer currently in BBC Studios on the APAP, which is an accelerator program that I'm also on. And then she happens to be doing it within natural history. I can just imagine you've got some pretty cool stories to share, Hannah.
But yeah, I've had an interesting few years, that's for sure. I feel very lucky to be working within this genre.
I mean, some of the stuff that you've said to me, like when we've been in passing, and even just your pictures, they just look really cool when we're doing our training and you're off on a boat somewhere filming somewhere. It looks pretty cool, but I can imagine you're going to tell me how difficult it will be and all the work that you put into it. 'Cause I imagine there's a lot of stuff.
Definitely. There's a lot of prep that goes behind every one of those shoots, but I would say TV in general is an industry that you get into because you're passionate about it and you have to love what you do. It's a tough industry. As you say, I've been to some amazing places, worked on some incredible programs. It is hard. You miss out on quite a lot of stuff. We'll probably get on to talking about those sorts of things. But no, I love it and I'm very happy to be in it.
As you know, I'm a lover of animals and all things animal documentaries, so I'm really excited to pick your brains. But anyway, let's start off back where it all started for you. What were the shows that got you interested in working in TV?
As a child, as a teenager, I loved watching wildlife documentaries, and that is the sort of blue chip super landmarks, but also presenter led documentaries. I would absorb everything and anything and really wanted to work in that. For me, while I've been working within the Natural History Unit, I've worked on a range of shows from super landmarks like Planet Earth 3 to a long running children's wildlife series, Deadly 60, with presenter Steve Backshall, which is what I'm currently working on. And it is the show that I would say inspired me the most. I watched it as a teenager. And for me, I wanted to be one of the Deadly crew. So getting to work on Series 4 a few years ago, Deadly Mission Shark, which was a branch off, and now Deadly 60 Series 5 is an absolute dream come true for me.
I just love the fact that you developed this love when you were younger and you just pursued it and you ran into it and you're just like, right, this is what I want to do. And you seem to be doing it really well. I mean, before we get on to anything else, I really would like to just talk about the amazing thing you did in Africa, the cycle cinema. Just because I think it really puts into perspective your passion and your love for the NHU. And I think it would just be great for people to hear. So yeah, can you just talk to me a bit about what it was you did out there?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, if I go back a level, I guess when I was in school, I loved wildlife, I loved animals, and was always told, okay, you should be a vet or a zookeeper. Those were the only two sort of animal related things that I thought were out there. But I would see these shows, and I thought that's what I want to do. However, when it came to doing university choices, I was actually going down the path of becoming a vet for quite a long time. Then I kind of backtracked and went, no, I want to do zoology. I want to do conservation, ecosystems, really go down that route. And a few of my teachers were quite surprised at the time. And I thought, no, it's okay. I want to do zoology and conservation. That's where I really think my passion is. So that's what I went to do university, zoology. Um, while I was there, so I went to Exeter University, but it was down at the Falmouth campus, and Falmouth University has an amazing arts university. So within my first year in Hull, within my flat, there were 3 people doing photography. So I had the best of both worlds, to quote Hannah Montana, quite literally. You I would do my science during the week, then on a weekend, I would shadow them and go on their, you know, photography shoot. And one of my flatmates, her boyfriend was studying film. So I asked again, Can you show me a film camera?" I always knew that I wanted to sort of get into television, but was never quite sure of that direction. So the very first time I picked up a film camera was one that he gave me, and he asked me to film one of their American football games. So
I
that's
mean,
what
that's a bit different.
yeah, it's so different. Well, I don't know. Wild.
I see the similarities.
Well, actually, a guy broke his leg within the first 4 minutes, so there was quite a lot of drama in that game. I filmed it. But yeah, so sorry, I kind of divulged there, but while I was at university, a friend and I set up an organization which led to us running filming projects internationally. We felt quite strongly that a lot of films are made for a Western audience. People go out to places like Africa and film for a Western audience, but very few were being made for a local audience. So the premise of our organization was going out to remote places and making films about inspiring local people who were doing amazing things for wildlife. And all of these were filmed in the local languages. Um, and then because of a lot of the places that we were going to didn't have electricity or television, we built a bicycle powered cinema, which meant that we could take those films back to communities and show them. So, did one project in Malawi whilst I was at university. And then after graduation, went to Kenya for 6 months, which was sort of the main project that we did. We made 10 local language films out there and showed them back to the communities. And one of the things that I loved the most was really getting to spend time with those people. I had the time to spend and really get to know them and their stories and then film them in Mara and Swahili and then show them back to these communities.
It just shows like you've just always loved that, and it's just nice to see that passion, I suppose. From that, is that then how you got into TV? How did you get into what you're doing?
Sort of. It was definitely a big boost, I think. In order to run the projects, we applied for grant funding and also received sponsorship from big camera companies like Sony, Canon, Manfrotto, DJI. This enabled us to use equipment that we'd have never have ordinarily been able to buy. We weren't taking a wage, all of the money that we raised was just going straight into running these projects. I finished that project in Kenya, returned to the UK, moved back home to Scotland, which I love, but my parents live in a very remote part of the Highlands, and I spent a few months working in my parents' cafe during the day and a pub in the evening. Ultimately, I knew that I needed to move to Bristol if I wanted to get into this industry. I'm not going to say everyone has to move to Bristol to get into this industry, but for me, it seemed like the most natural next step. So, to paint a picture, I saw a room was advertised on Facebook that was available for 1 month. So I decided to move, drove the 11 hours down to Bristol,
Oh wow,
and that's it. I've lived here ever since.
that's pretty impressive. Did you go in as a runner? Is that like how it all began for you?
No, I didn't actually. The story of how I got my first job was quite a funny one. I arrived on a Tuesday in Bristol. I spent a few days getting my bearings, writing my CV with the intention of pinging it out to every independent company and I could find. And that Sunday, however, there's something called the Balloon Fiesta in Bristol. So
Yeah.
I knew a couple of people that were coming into the city to go to that, and I said, "Okay, I'm gonna meet you there." I ended up missing my bus, eventually got on a bus, got completely lost until I saw a couple walking with 2 young kids. I'm gonna ask for directions. So I started walking with them to the Balloon Fiesta. They asked me, "What brought you to Bristol?" I told them about my project in Kenya and what I was interested in. And when we actually got to the fiesta, the lady turned around and said, "Well, I'm actually a producer and I've got a job that I think you'd be perfect for." She gave me her email address. While I pushed her baby in the pram, she wrote her email address in my phone. I
No.
went to see her on the Wednesday and she offered me a job and I started the following Monday as a researcher. I actually skipped, I guess, the stage of being a runner, but I think my experience in Kenya, there was a lot of transferable skill.
What's really important to highlight that I've mentioned a lot on this podcast is it's a lot about networking and talking to people. And okay, that's a very, very unnormal way of getting a TV job.
Don't hang around bus stops and expect to suddenly get a job.
But it does prove that thing of if you talk to people and you're just like open, then it might open some doors for you. And but that's pretty cool. That is pretty cool. I like that story.
I think you're exactly right. For ages, I said that it was completely potluck. If I'd got the right bus, if I'd actually known where I was going and prepped in that way, I never would have met her. Um, but then someone said to me, they said, "No, you know what? Like you were prepared to speak to them. You'd been doing your CV. You knew what skills you had, and without realizing it, you'd managed to sell yourself." to the point that she then wanted to speak to you again. So I think you're exactly right. You just need to put yourself out there and be prepared to speak to people.
Absolutely. It definitely does. I mean, you bring me perfectly on to my next question. You're in the industry now. What projects have you worked on? Any cool stories that you could share from your time working within natural history? Because I can imagine you got loads. I imagine you could have your own podcast yourself, to be fair. And I would listen to it.
Oh, thank you. Let's see how this one goes first. But I appreciate that. Oh gosh, so many stories. I don't really know where to start. I mean, my time on Deadly 60 has been very, very special. I think one of the best things about Deadly 60 is that, and something that drew me in, was being able to see the crew within it. So you actually see the behind the scenes, and what you see is very much what you get. We film everything as is. So it feels very real. I've been to some amazing places. I'd say one of my favorites was when we went to Norway to film Orca. That was just incredible. I'd never been anywhere quite like it. And to see the Norwegian fjords, which were just stunning. We saw the Northern Lights. It was I'd say that was pretty incredible. One funny story, the very, very first shoot that I did for Deadly 60 was in South Africa, and we were filming a rhino conservation special, and we were working with an anti-poaching team, and they had a helicopter that they used to do that. So in order to film the opening title sequence for Deadly 60, I went up in the helicopter to get that second shot. I was so excited to be in that helicopter that as I saw the crew, I waved at everybody, and I just had my producer come on the radio and go, "Hannah, just remember not to wave. We're gonna do that one more time." I was like, "Oh, yeah. No, what am I thinking?" I went straight back to filming. One of the other things that I really love about working on the sorts of shows that I do is getting to speak to scientists and researchers from around the world that are doing groundbreaking research. It's truly incredible to have the opportunity to speak to them. One show that I worked on was called The Year Earth Changed for Apple. It was one that we made during COVID. So it was all about wildlife around the world and how it adapted to COVID. Everything was filmed remote, nobody was really, really traveling. And a lot of the research that was being churned out was, you know, there and then. So when we were making this show, the research hadn't been published by that point. So I was talking direct to the scientists, direct to the researchers as they crunched their numbers, and everything was sort of coming as it was. That was really interesting as well. It was narrated by David Attenborough, so I was very conscious that we needed, to be getting those facts right.
We've already said it. Working in telly is so hard and difficult and really fun. Are you able to talk to me about the process of producing a wildlife documentary? What are some of the key steps that are involved? What tasks, responsibilities do you do? I'd love to know.
I think it varies so much depending on the production that you're on. So from working on something like Planet Earth 3 to Deadly 60, the stages are completely different, but a lot of that does come down to the time. I guess the main points of what you're after will remain somewhat constant. One of the main things is ultimately finding your stories. I'd say one of the best things is just to speak to the people out there that are on the ground. Actually, that's something I would probably say. I've met a few people who work within natural history, and they will say that that's because they prefer animals to humans. I would say, however, that yes, we're filming animals, but it's still a very human-led industry, and you have to have good communication and realize that the people on the ground are your best friends in terms of finding not only good behavioral stories, but also with the logistics on the ground and ultimately getting you close to be able to get those good shots. The various different stages are you find your story. Logistics, are up there in terms of how you're going to film it, where is it, location. That's where your production management team are amazing.
Our films would not be made without our amazing junior production manager. Like she
Yeah,
leads all four teams. We're like one cog. She is just like the big
yeah.
cog that we report back to. And she's just insane. Like production management, I think, so unsung.
Yes, couldn't agree more. Absolutely. So I guess once you've got your story and you know ideally what you want to film, then you go out and you try and film it. And shoots, people will go for weeks, even months at a time, again, depending on the type of production that you're on. I would say on a Deadly 60 shoot, the longest I've been on was 3 weeks. But for these big landmarks, you will have camera operators that are out there for 4 months, depending on the behavior that we're going for. And then much the same with all the other productions, you come back and then you go into the edit and the post, and ultimately it all comes together to make that show.
What you mentioned there about finding stories, Um, how do you find the stories? Like for me, when I'm looking for crime stories, I go onto local news articles and I'll be like, try and find specific things around certain areas for certain bits of crime. How do you find the stories for, say, I don't know, a rhino conservation documentary or for something for Daily 60? Well, where do we even start? You don't go talking to like a gorilla. Who do you speak
Oh, I wish I could talk to wildlife. Did you ever watch the Wild Thornberrys when you were younger?
It was one of my favorite shows. Like even the other day, the Wild Thornberrys movie was on TV. I did watch it and it was great.
I love it. And that Wild Thornberrys movie is all about elephants and poaching. So maybe if we're going further back than Deadly 60, wanting to be Eliza, I thought she was the
Actually,
coolest. Number one wish, talk to animals. And that would definitely make my job easier.
but anyway,
Sorry.
how find stories?
To be honest, it's much the same way as what you've just said there, where you're just on the lookout for articles. I think it if you're looking for something that's, say, more new to science, and I think that's something that everybody's always wanting to do. You're always wanting to find something that's a new behavior. So honestly, social media is your best friend with that too, because the amount of new articles that come out every day is a minefield. You have to really tread through it. And I think as you go on, something that I think is just really important is to, when you make connections with people, to maintain them and keep in contact, because I will get people message me now that I worked with years ago with new ideas. And that's something that's very valuable. Ultimately, people on the ground living close and alongside this wildlife know them the best.
When you're out on location, miles and miles and miles and miles away from the safety of your production office, what are the common challenges that you come across when you're out and about? Because obviously I can imagine there's language barriers.
I find that a hard question because it is so varied depending on the production. I'd say it's all consuming. I think it's something that I'm not very good at, and I will admit this, is that work-life balance. And I think it's something that's very important to have. And I think particularly on a shoot, when you're very much surrounded by it, it can be very difficult to zone out. And I've often woken up in the middle of the night, sat bolt upright, like I've got a camera in my hands, because you're very much surrounded and you have to throw yourself in. From a practical point of view, yeah, you're right. Language barriers can be tricky. I think depending on the animals that you're filming, there can be additional risks, but that's where you do your risk assessments. Health and safety is absolutely paramount. I filmed last year a series called Deadly Mission Shark, and that was where we took children from the UK out to the Bahamas and joined Bahamian children, and we took them diving with sharks. It was really important for raising awareness that sharks aren't man-eaters, but at the same time, we'd gone through all the steps and our risk assessment, I'm sort of dancing around this a little bit. I think with every single shoot you do, you need to be aware that there are gonna be challenges along the way, but how you deal with each one is part of that, pre-production process, and you would never just go out and just shoot.
I was so shocked when you told me how many people you had on location, like the size of your team. And so I just wanted you to like share that with people listening. Maybe because it was a landmark in my eyes, I thought it had like the drama treatment to some extent. What is the setup of your team like? Say, for instance, if you're on a landmark production or if you were on Deadly 60, what roles are out there?
You've got, actual on location teams. If I'm doing a Deadly 60 shoot, the one that I just did, there was, the producer, a main camera operator, sound recordist, a researcher, and myself, and then our presenter. So that's 6 people, from the editorial crew going out there. And then back home, we've got our production manager, our series producer, our exec, our JPM. On the landmarks, you do have a bigger team, but those location-based teams are often kept quite small. I think especially if you're, searching for wildlife, it helps to have those smaller numbers. If you're on location, you need to be able to fulfill multiple roles. And, if one day you're filming and then the next day you need to help with the sound, you need to have that flexibility to be able to adapt on location to help and do all those different aspects.
I suppose that's also one of them challenges, really, isn't it? You need to be so versatile because you're out in the middle of nowhere and you're not going to get anyone there quickly. So you have to be able to do it. What skills should people have, in your perspective, in order to work in the NHU, in order to work on these nature documentaries? What would you reckon if you were hiring a runner or a researcher or whatever? What would you be looking for?
Certainly a passion for it and an interest in it. It is a tough industry. I've worked on a production once when I was setting up a shoot in both Canada and Australia at the same time. So I was having Zoom calls with scientists at midnight and at 5 in the morning. it's an around the clock thing. That's where I say that work-life balance, you've got to be self-sufficient. And you've got to trust that what you've brought out there is enough to get by. Actually, that's what I find the least stressful bit. I think my most stressful part is that 2 days before a shoot when I've got Google, I've got the Ethernet, I've got Amazon that I can order something quickly. Like, have I got everything that I need for potentially the next 5 weeks in the middle of nowhere with, limited resources? Don't be afraid to ask. There's been so many situations where I've not known how to do something. So I've just said, you know what? I've not done that before. However, I'd love to learn. So can you show me? Or just have that interest and learn from the people around you.
I mean, recently, we've also been having our camera training, and I know recently you went and shot on a boat. Where were you for that? I can't remember where you were.
I was filming in Mexico.
What was that like? How did you always know you wanted to shoot? Like, do you think if you wanted to go into the NHU, you need to be someone that you have to go on and shoot? Is it important to be self-shooting, I suppose, in the NHU? But also tell me a bit about what it was like filming on that boat, because it looks amazing.
Do you need to be able to shoot? I would say no. However, having an interest in it and being prepared to pick up a camera definitely does help. I think we're in a very tricky time in television at the moment. So again, coming back onto that word versatility and being able to fulfill multiple roles, I do think help. Do you need to be proficient at it to get into the industry? Absolutely not. But just having that interest and willingness to learn from the people around you and say, you know what, I haven't done this before, but sure, give me that extra camera and go from there. When it comes to filming, I'd say one of the best things you can do is then ask, if you can, to get into the edit, because that's when I've learnt the most from watching my filming, from being in an edit and actually just, asking the editor, asking the edit producer, how can I improve that? Or was this helpful? Did I get the right variety of shots? On my first ones compared to now, I've learned a lot in, and I'm still learning, but learned a lot in how I can improve and making sure that you get that variety to help you edit from your close-ups to your mid shots to your wides and getting all your establishing shots. So, no, you don't have to film. It helps if you're happy to give it a go. What was it like filming on the boat in Mexico? So we were on a liverboard for about 2 weeks.
Wait, so you were
I
actually in like out to sea for 2 weeks?
Yes, yeah.
I I mean, no, I'd rather you than me. There's 2 things I hate in this world. I mean, I love going on holiday, but I hate boats because
Okay.
it's just so unnatural, and I hate flying because big metal thing in the sky just shouldn't happen.
I get a little travel sick, but when you're on a boat for 2 weeks, and especially when you're filming and you're looking down the lens, that's really difficult for feeling quite icky.
It absolutely looks amazing. We've spoken a lot about what you've done and filming, etc. We have kind of touched upon it, but what could people, future camera people for the NHU or research producer, whatever, what could people do that are just starting out if they want to get into your side of the industry? What steps can they start doing? Do you necessarily need to have a degree in zoology? Is that something that you have to have?
I'd say whatever your route, whatever you've done so far, it's not limited. No, you don't need a zoology degree. At least I don't think you do. I think there's that belief that maybe you do, and perhaps, years and years ago, the majority of people in the natural history unit did have that. It's the route I took, but that was something that I was just super passionate about conservation, wildlife in general, and I managed to merge the 2 together. But everything is transferable. You don't even have to have gone to university, I don't think. To put it into context, my very, very first series producer did architecture at university, and the first assistant producer that I worked with did fashion design at university, all within the natural history
Very
unit.
different.
Very different. Everything is transferable no matter what you've done, and I think that's really important to remember. One bit of advice would be, if you do get that first job, first role, I think the industry has changed a lot since COVID. And don't get me wrong, working from home can be great. But my big advice would be, get into the office, because the amount that you pick up from the team just by being there, last minute meetings that they say, hey, do you want to come to this? Or things that you'll overhear will be stuff that you'll remember. For new starters looking to get into the industry, I think, a lot of my camera skills were learnt from watching YouTube. Most people will have a video camera in their back pocket. I went into a primary school recently and gave a talk and said to these children, if your mum and dad has a phone, then try it out. the teacher sent me a few photos later in the day. The school had some iPads and they'd sent them all outside to go and make a wildlife film. And they
Oh,
found
wow.
ladybugs, they'd found pine cones that they were pretending were hedgehogs, and they made little documentaries. And it was one of the most important things in this industry is to recognize what makes a good story, what makes a bad one. And it doesn't matter how many mistakes you make early on while you're searching for those things. And the best way is to go out there, film something,
It's to try it,
learn
definitely.
something.
I mean,
Exactly.
I love taking like that's like a hobby of mine. I wouldn't say I'm the best personality, but I just like to do it and just teach myself. That's what I love doing. I could talk to you about the NHU for days, but I just want to move on to the APAP that we're on. Anyone that doesn't know, anyone listening, we are currently on a year-long program with BBC Studios. It's called the Assistant Producer Accelerator Program. And we're really lucky in the fact that we're getting loads of training, loads of masterclasses from people, and a really stable job for a year. So we're really lucky at the minute, and I feel like we all know that. But I just want to chat to you a bit about how you're finding it, really, and just about being an AP in general. So yeah, 6 months on, how have you found the APAP so far? Is it everything you've wanted?
It's been everything I've wanted. It's been brilliant, to be honest. I think it's an industry where it can be challenging at times to upskill yourself or get training. Something that drew me to the program was things like camera training, because I'm very much being sold as a shooting assistant producer now, yet I'm very aware that I'd never had any formal training. YouTube's been my best friend for finding out how to use things. So I think if anything, it's helping to cement those skills that I have been wanting to develop. But it's not just that, it's the soft skills as well, because there's so many different aspects to making a production. So everything from management to managing difficult conversations is stuff that we wouldn't get the chance in other places.
One thing that I just really want to touch on, because in the podcast, in a load of episodes, it's always been that thing of network with people, talk to people, find your peers and just stick with them. And we're really lucky in the fact that we've got the 12 of us and we can talk and we can, I suppose, not just talk to people that are within the NHU or within crime, we can meet people within different genres. I'd
Yeah.
say to people listening that if you're wanting to get into telly or if you are in telly, expand your network of people from the genre you're in, because you can learn so much. Like I've learned so much from everyone that we're on this program with. But to anyone listening that may be a researcher or a runner or is wanting to get into TV, what would you say to them? What would you say it's like stepping up from a researcher to an AP? How have you found that change?
I think for me personally, in terms of the change, a lot of the things that I'm now doing as an assistant producer, I was doing before, but it's just with an added level of responsibility. And I think it's because I've always been really keen to get stuck in to anything and everything that I can do. I think if someone's going to give you the opportunity to do something, I would advise against being so stuck, sort of, I guess, in your mind of what a role should be. That's not to say don't undersell yourself. If you're doing the job of a researcher for a few years, you shouldn't still be called a runner. But I think there's blurred lines between what the different roles entail. I've been so grateful over the last 6 months because I've been given the opportunity to direct and edit produce my own episode for Deadly 60. Some might say that's a producer role, but it's not, because I've had the support there and I've just been working with an incredible team that have allowed me and given me that opportunity. And I say opportunity because it absolutely is. And I think just having that mindset of absorbing as much information as you can is the biggest bit of advice I would have. But again, doing that transition, I think the role of an assistant producer is to, sounds daft, but make the producer's life easier.
I'd
Because
say so.
yeah, you've got to have that overarching idea of how the production is made, and then also be the go-between potentially between the producers and the researchers and runners, if you have them. I've never actually worked on a production that's had a runner. When I was a researcher, I'd say I was doing what would be expected of a runner and a researcher, and at times an assistant producer. It's those blurred lines where I think you've just got to be willing to put your hand to anything and everything. Just reach out to people. If you're seeing people that are working on a show that you want to work out on, everyone's human. I think sometimes you can put television on this pedestal, and it's not. It's made by human beings who, the most part are nice. It's
It's not
just
all people that just happen to get to do, I suppose, extraordinary things.
yes,
Uh, and,
exactly.
and and we are really lucky and we all know that. But yeah, people are willing to talk to you. Email someone and say, can we have a coffee? I did it last week when we were at our training. There was a networking event here in Cardiff that I wanted to go to because it was based every single Cardiff production were basically doing speed dating with talent managers and CEOs of companies. And I was like, I really want to go there, but I couldn't because I was away in London. So what I did is I found their email that I could send my CV to, and I just said to them, sadly, I can't be there because I'm doing this, but can we meet up with a coffee and just chat? Because I'd love to work with you. And I just said some of the shows that I've been enjoying. And I've had some replies, and like that opens doors.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. No, exactly right. Just saying, "Hey, do you mind if we just meet for a quick coffee?" And you get to chat. And actually, that goes back to your question of how you set up shoot. One of the best things you can do is just find out who's been there before. Hey, how did you get on? What difficulties did you have? I think a sharing of information is so important.
I love chatting to you about documentaries and about animals and stuff. So I've got one more question for you, and it's just, what have you been watching on TV recently? Any cool podcasts as well that you've been listening to?
I've been watching a lot recently. I love this question. Mammals, the new series is
Great.
out. I watched the latest episode of that last night, all about water. Absolutely incredible. Guilty pleasure, interior design masters with Alan Carr. Absolutely
Absolutely
love
love
it.
it. I could talk for hours about the show because
Okay.
it's probably one of my favorite things. But can we just appreciate, not the end of last episode, the end of the one before when there was that argument on the sofa? It was
Oh,
so uncomfortable.
oh. Yes, that was very awkward. Yeah, that could have maybe been had. Well, I was going to say off air, but then
It
it
was so
time
awkward.
in.
Yeah, no, that is one of them shows that is just wholesome and it's perfect viewing. Anyone listening, please watch it. Alan Carr leading that show is amazing and it's beautiful. And I love all the interior design. And it makes me, I feel like my passions in life, there's animals and interior design. Another life, I would be an interior designer. One
Yeah,
that you recommended to me last week, which I ended up
yeah.
watching, Virunga, which was really, really good. And to anyone listening or watching, it's a documentary about, like, I suppose, conservation of the gorillas in the Congo, isn't it? And at the extent that they have to go to look after them. It starts off really nice and beautiful, and you see the relationship build, and it's honestly really nice, and you really see the true horror of it. And I think for anyone that is into their nature documentaries, that's one of them ones that I'd absolutely recommend. It's an important watch.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and I was really glad when you said that you enjoyed that one because I think it's fantastic. The other one that we spoke about was Lion: The Rise and Fall of the Marsh Pride, and I mean, for me, that combined sort of a well-loved series from my childhood of Big Cat Diaries with conservation, which was my driving force for being in this industry as an adult, and having spent a lot of time in Kenya and rural Africa. For me, the Rise and Fall of Marsh Pride, as well as Virunga, felt real. I'm always excited to hear those local voices. We saw the work of the Kenya Wildlife Service featured, and I love to see that airtime given to potentially more controversial and hard hitting narratives. And both, I think, epitomize how I've seen the industry evolve over the years. And it gives me confidence in this direction. You've got the beautiful imagery that draws you in, but I truly feel that it's our responsibility as filmmakers to tell that full story. And both of these deliver the truth of what is affecting the people and the wildlife there.
Absolutely,
Um,
and I think there's
yeah.
no better way to end this podcast. I think that was a beautiful ending.
Oh,
You made it so easy, Hannah. It's been amazing getting to chat to you, and I really hope that anyone listening, I mean, I don't even hope, I know that they all have got something out of this. It's really, really interesting. So thank you.
no, thank you for having me. I'll see you soon.
Pleasure.